All right. Well, welcome everybody to the second ORCE Capstone event. This is the Oregon Marine Scientists and Educator Alliance capstone event for the cohort that has been working on lessons since early 2021. My name is Kate Goodwin, and I am the Special Projects Coordinator at Oregon Sea Grant and also the Communications Coordinator for the Oregon Coast STEM Hub. And I'm joined by Tracy Cruz, who's the Marine Education Manager at Oregon Sea Grant. And we are excited to share with you and feature the ORCE cohort and all the things they've been working on for these past several months. This meeting is being recorded so that folks who can't make it today will be able to hopefully view it later and hear about your projects. There are lots of different groups represented by the folks who are involved in the Teacher Scientist Alliance, some from various school districts, teachers, and then from various research organizations within Oregon. And as a reminder, the Oregon Marine Scientists and Educator Alliance, which we say is ORCE, is bringing educators and marine researchers together around ocean issues, career-connected learning, and effective science communication practices. We're funded by Oregon Sea Grant, the Oregon Coast STEM Hub, and the National Science Foundation through OSU's Regional Class Research Vessel Project. So our plan for today is just a welcome and overview of ORCE just a little bit in the beginning here. Tracy is going to talk about the RCRV project, and then we'll launch into project presentations by each of the 7 ORCE teams. We're going to share what they've been working on using posters and presentation. And then at the end, we'll talk about upcoming opportunities because we are planning to do this all again in the coming school year. So this is a great way for those who haven't done this before to see today what it's like, and it might inspire folks to be interested in applying to be part of ORCE in the future year. So just to recap how we got here today, if you start up with the little star at the top of the screen, ORCE starts with an application process. We have teacher applications and scientist applications. So folks are fill out an online form explaining why they're interested in the project. Once the selections of participants have been made, we ask the teachers to pilot existing lessons that have already been created by previous ORCE groups to sort of just get the idea of what's there and how it might work. And then they can also give us feedback on the lessons. That's one thing throughout this I would love to convey, is we would love to have educators trying out these lessons and providing feedback, because we can we want them to be as effective as possible. And so the more people who do them, the better we can make sure they're working for everybody. So the teachers in this cohort piloted some existing lessons, gave us some feedback, and then the whole group met together for a kickoff event. Now, the first time we did ORCE back in 2019, it was an in-person event. This year, because of this COVID situation, we did it online through Zoom, but it was pretty cool. We did 3 days, 2 hours each day. And during this kickoff event, we met each other. The scientists got to talk about their research. The teachers got to talk about their classrooms and backgrounds. And so everybody learned a little bit about everyone else. We also had some professional development. We learned about some of the next generation science standards, which might have been old news for some, but new for others, and also science communication practices. We had to talk about that as well. So at the end of the kickoff event, teams were formed, placed together in groups where we have one scientist and 2 teachers, usually one math teacher and one science teacher. And those teams met together and planned throughout the spring how they're going to put together an ORCE lesson or a unit around an anchoring phenomenon that has to do with the researcher's science. So they met on their own or at least monthly on Zoom to work through this process. When they got their materials together, they would pilot new lessons in the classroom when possible. And at the final submission of the unit has been delivered to us. They're going to be sharing here at this capstone event all of what they've been doing, which is great because I think at the kickoff, everybody met each other, but we may not know what everyone else is doing. So I'm looking forward. I've seen it all, but I'm excited to hear it from all of you. And then in September, we hope to get the final versions of all your lessons published online so that future applicants can check those out as well. Oh, and if you weren't sure, you are here at the capstone event. This is a clockwise rotation here. And now, since the ORCE project is supported in part by the National Science Foundation's Regional Class Research Vessel project, aka RCRV, at this time, Tracy will talk about the RCRV project and its commitment to marine science communication and improving data literacy among students and the public.
Thank you, Kate. Hello, everybody, and thank you all so much for joining us today, and to all of the teams for all of your hard work. So Oregon State University back in 2013 got a large grant from the National Science Foundation to design and build the next group of regional class research vessels. So if you can see the one that's behind me and my screensaver here, that is our current OSU research vessel called the Oceana. She's over 40 years old and is due to retire. The Tawny, which is the vessel that is featured in the center of this picture, is going to be her replacement, and she is currently being built right now down in Louisiana, and we should have her in early 2023 if all goes well. So Kate's going to show a very brief 2-minute video that talks just a little bit about the research vessels, and then we will talk a little bit about how this ties into what you all have been working on.
You do have people that use these giant climate models and ocean models, but without data to validate them, they'd be guesses.
A lot of the satellite work can only see down at sometimes just a few millimeters below the surface. So you really have to be on a boat to make measurements within the ocean interior.
There are still things, and I think there will always be things that we can only measure from ships. For me, I can't take a little copepod from the ocean and do an experiment sitting in my office. I need to be out there on a ship.
Research vessels live out their intended life cycle and eventually must be replaced. As new technologies emerge and as the needs of the scientific community change, alongside the very ocean they seek to understand. The National Science Foundation set out to meet these growing demands, funding the design and construction of 3 ships to forge the future of ocean science.
We need vessels with all kinds of capabilities to reach all of the world's oceans for the different research topics. The regional class research vessels, like the 3 we're constructing now, are intended primarily for coastal environments, the continental slope, the continental shelf. And we're building 3 so we can support oceanography needs on each of the 3 main US coasts, West, East, and Gulf of Mexico.
The regional class research vessels are intended to focus on coastal ocean research. And there's really never been a more critical time for that. Climate change is real. Climate change is being caused by the buildup of carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. This is warming the planet, it's warming the oceans. If we would like to be able to understand this, predict the trajectory of change, there's never been a more important time to study the oceans.
Each major U.S. coast will host one of these ships.
Is that where you'd like me to stop?
Yes, please. So it is an 8-minute video, and if any of you are interested in seeing it, it is available on YouTube, and you can show it to your students as well. Next slide, Kate.
Can I add
go
something about these
Absolutely.
ships, if I could? The ship that's being built is going to support a lot of research off the coast of Oregon. And in particular, the project I work on is kind of the biggest moorings that the ship is going to be able to deploy. And so currently the Oceanus is not able to do this work. So this ship really makes like my work and a lot of the other stuff happening at OSU. It'll make our work possible off to the next few decades. So it's super important for a lot of us here.
Thank you, Jonathan. So in addition to being able to deploy a lot of larger equipment, including underwater robots and the moorings that Jonathan just mentioned, the research vessel will also have data presence, which essentially means that while it's underway and out at sea, it will be streaming data to the shore. So any researchers that are on shore have access to it, as well as the general public. So there's a suite of about 30 different instruments. So you'll be able to go online and see what the sea surface temperature is, what the salinity is, dissolved oxygen, those types of things. But in order for the general public and teachers and students to be able to utilize it, the Regional Class Research Vessel group realizes that we need to do some work in trying to improve data literacy for students in order to be able to access and utilize the data that will be available in a couple of years. Next slide, Kate. So as part of this large grant, the National Science Foundation has given money to the Regional Class Research Vessel Outreach and Education Team, and I sit on that. And so we have a few main goals in order to help communicate what is going on both with the vessels and the importance and the data that will be available as well. So the first goal we had was to create an interactive exhibit at Hatfield Marine Science Center, which is in Newport. And I'm happy to say that that is up and running. And so if you're interested in seeing it and actually driving the vessel, it's a simulation, you can visit Hatfield Marine Science Center, the visitor center, by registering online. Since we're in COVID, registration is required in order to enter. And in addition, we wanted to make sure that we were providing some professional development for researchers. There will be, as the data presence system comes online, some additional professional development for them and how they can best utilize that data stream, not just for their own purposes of research, but to actually communicate with the public. In addition, we wanted to provide some supports for teachers and students so that we can help to build that data literacy that I think we recognize is also important. Next slide, Kate. So as we started this process and we started gathering information, there were several needs that became obvious. As I mentioned, data literacy, I think, is lacking in general. And although the next generation science standards have been adopted and talk a lot about or have strategies for improving data literacy, we recognize that historically, a lot of times people that are not teachers create curriculum and expect the teachers to utilize it. And we wanted to take a different strategy. So we wanted to provide professional development opportunities for teachers and not only increase their own data literacy, but actually allow them as the experts and practitioners to work with researchers who are the content experts and to create their own curriculum, which will help improve that data literacy for the students. And kind of what you see here is a little bit diagram about kind of the data process and the steps that are involved. Next slide. So another thing that became obvious is that for students to really connect with data, to care about the data, to understand the data, it really needs to be relatable, relevant, and contextualized. So one of the current terms that is out there right now is data biographies. So really, when data is presented, encouraging people to create these stories around the data that tell who is collecting it, to personalize the researchers, to help address why it's being collected, how it is being collected, and how it is being utilized, to really provide that why for the students. Why is it important to learn about this? Next slide, Kate.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, go ahead.
You said data something, I couldn't catch that word.
Biography. So biography, you know, your background, you telling a
Oh,
story,
okay. So
but about
data
the data.
biographies?
Yeah,
Okay,
around the
thank you.
data itself. So how does this connect to the ORCE project itself? So for the ORCE project, we're really bringing together the researchers and the teachers in order to co-create that integrated math and science curriculum that focuses on an anchoring phenomenon and helps to build that scientific and data literacy. What we were also interested, though, is building in career-connected learning components. And one of the things that is very important to the National Science Foundation, as well as researchers in general, I think, is wanting to provide those skills so that those that come after us, our future workers, our students right now, will have those skills and have that understanding and that excitement and passion about pursuing science as a career. We also wanted to provide opportunities for our participating researchers to improve their science communication skills. So Kate had mentioned a little bit about some of the training that was provided in the kickoff event, but also just bringing together those researchers to learn from the teachers as they develop these lessons helps hone their science communication skills. And then eventually, we're really hoping that relationships are built between these researchers and these teachers that last much longer than this year-long project they are involved in.
All right. So this year's cohort, there are 7 teams representing 7 scientists and 14 middle and high school teachers. The teams name themselves with some guidance, and they're actually related to the topics that their lessons are around. The members of each team work together to create a 5E lesson focused on an anchoring phenomenon related to the researchers' science, and the teachers were mostly able to test the activities in the classroom and adjust the lessons as needed, and then finalized. And so what we're going to do now is launch into presentations. So I already put the posters that you all created on the ORCE website. And if you would like to share your own screen to share your poster, you can do that. Otherwise, I have them in this PowerPoint, and you could just talk to the ones that are on the screen. And we were wanting to start with Team Rockfish because one of the members had to skedaddle a little bit early. And so does that sound good for everybody? Does anyone have questions?
I have a question. Is Greg, are you here on the phone?
I am here on the phone.
I didn't see your name, but I have that.
Yeah, Kate's going to show our poster in her for us.
Well, let's just launch right in. We've got Teaming with Fish, which is Team Rockfish with Greg and Jessica and Heidi. And I will let you all take it away. And then at the end, we could do, a couple questions at the end of each group's presentation. And then if we have time after all of you present, we can have a little Q&A time if we have that space.
So we agreed that I would go first. My name is Greg Krutzikowski. I work with Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, and we centered our lesson plan around a video lander project that I did, where we dropped this video camera down to the bottom of the ocean in a specially created sort of package that had lights and battery packs and waterproof housings, et cetera, to see what's down there and what the habitat looked like. And one of the things that I tried to do with this was also to get an estimate of some of the rockfish and some of the fish, other species that we saw down in the bottom. And it's an interesting thing. We figured that it would grab the kids' attention because so few people actually get to go underwater, especially here off the Oregon coast where it's kind of cold and not always great visibility. And but also a lot of people love to fish and to catch fish. And so the focus of this work was to try to, get data to help create sustainable fisheries. And what was really most amazing to me about participating in this was taking the work that I did and working with these two just amazing teachers to be able to translate and use this as an anchoring phenomenon to work with their students and bring the research into the classroom in ways that 4th through 6th graders could understand and start to work with, there's all kinds of things about statistics and measures of center and, graphing data. And it was amazing to see how these guys translated this into something that will work for them in their classroom. And they did amazing things. And I think it was really cool. And that's all I've got to say.
Heidi, do you want to introduce yourself, or do you want me to?
Sure, I can. And my name is Heidi Wacker, and I teach 6th grade down here in Port Orford. And I would echo what Greg said. I've just really appreciated working with these two so much. Bringing this research to the classroom was really exciting because down here in Port Orford, a lot of families and students are really closely tied to the ocean some way through their family's profession, fishing, or working at the hatchery, or in some way. So this was an exciting project. Didn't get to fully implement all the pieces with my students, but definitely the ones that we did were very meaningful. So I'll let Jessica go ahead and introduce yourself.
Thanks. I'm Jessica Bailey. I teach, I have been teaching 6th grade the last few years here in Lincoln City, Oregon. I'm going to be moving up to teach math next year at the middle school. But this year, just like Heidi said, we weren't able to implement all of the pieces, and that was just due to being in the hybrid learning situation this year. And so there was just a lot of pieces to the puzzle. But the most exciting thing for me, besides what Heidi and Greg mentioned about the connections that our students have, being their families, being fishermen, or just liking to go and fish, or being here on the coast, was that our students in 6th grade study about human impact on the environment. And they really care and want to do something about managing and protecting and monitoring marine and other ecosystems. And so our essential question and Greg's research really tied in with our students' innate wanting to do something. And so after they did the learning about rockfish, which was just fascinating in and of itself, because there's a lot of misconceptions about exactly what rockfish are all about and how long they live and everything. The question really was just, how can we monitor their numbers so that we can keep fishing and keep their numbers sustainable? And so at the end of the project, students can kind of come up with a monitoring plan of their own, and that kind of ties into that engineering piece that another person mentioned in the chat. So this unit was really rich with math, science, and then also engineering, which I thought was really exciting.
Yeah, I think one particular piece that I got to use with my students, and that was a really exciting part of the learning plan, was in Explain, when we tied Greg's research and data to the statistics unit, which we do in sixth grade. So things that we already, need to learn and that are core pieces of the math standards, Common Core math standards, yet we could use his data for our students to practice that, and they could see, real scientists, people in this profession, how they were making graphs similar to what we had just practiced in sixth grade, a few steps ahead, but they could see where it was headed and why that would be useful out in the world and out in the ocean. So some of those main topics were measuring center, mean, median, mode, dot plots, histograms, those kinds of things that were all part of sixth grade math class. We kept having to rein ourselves in as a group because there were so many other math standards and directions that this could have gone. That was where we ended up focusing the project, but it's also exciting to think of the extensions of where it could go in the future for other teachers and other students and other grade levels.
And I'll just chime in a little bit more. We also were able to find some interesting videos on other aspects, things. There was one called Fishing for Data, which was really kind of the big picture of sustainable fisheries and the need for gathering data to make to inform how we do fishery management. Some of the others were, things like a rockfish, decompressing. When they come up, they have these air bladders in their body, and if they come up from really deep, the air bladder ends up sticking out their mouth, and they can be recompressed by being lowered in the water. And so we've got links to videos to that in our lesson plan too. So there's a lot of really fun stuff to do as well. So, it was a great experience working with these folks.
Well, that's great. Thank you all for your interpretation. And I can't see everything, but are there other questions from anyone who might have a question for our presenters?
I have a question. Since many of us live near or on native tribal history, native tribal land, I was wondering how we could tie that into our native fisheries. Is that something that you guys looked at, or that's something I think would be great to add on to this?
We added in the explore and in the engage piece. That was really important to us, that we like Heidi mentioned, this unit is just really rich with opportunities for extensions when it comes to cooking, or like you said, native voices or engineering. And so one of the ideas that we had in the engage section is to, and this is a topic that I think is pretty big in science lately, is bringing student voice into the classroom. So like seeking out photographs or just evidence of how they interact with fish in their home life. And so like for our tribal students, that might look different than maybe students whose families work in the docks. And then we added some research for teachers. So just some background information on tribal perspectives is in the lesson there with links. And then of course, having a guest speaker would be really ideal. That we weren't able to have guest speakers this year because of COVID, and we were on Zoom. Greg zoomed in with us to give us information, but that's definitely something that we added into the lesson. But we could always do better, so if you have resources to add.
Great question, Carissa and Jessica. I think another place where focus on that would really fit is under the elaborate section of the 5E lesson plan, sort of the career connections and the town hall, where we're thinking about all the different perspectives of why does this matter? Who does it matter to? What are the stories in our community? And so that was an inspiration from a previous a different group on a different topic did sort of a town hall format in the first round of ORC. And so I remembered being really impressed by that. And then Jessica wrote the lesson plan for the town hall on this topic. So that would be another place where I could really see a focus on that growing.
Mm-hmm.
I'll just mention, because Kate and Tracy are probably too humble to bring it up, but they put together a terrific workshop called about commercial fishing on the coast, and we really worked Bay Street and Newport, but we got to see a Fish and Wildlife guy bring, tallying and looking at all the rockfish and stuff. Just a great opportunity for a field trip that they could flesh that out for you, or aim you towards that curriculum. Something about a hook.
Finding the hook, I think it was.
Yeah, it was great. And then there's that discovery boat in the bay as well.
Yeah, there's a lot of great opportunities to connect with this. And I love how this lesson has just so many different, it's very interdisciplinary and really could go in lots of different ways, but you did a great job of putting it all together. And I think we should be getting close to moving on to our next presenter. Do you have any other burning questions, or shall we hold those on till the end and move on to the cetacean team? Thank you so much, Jessica and Heidi and Greg.
Yeah, I'm going to have to sign off here, but I'm looking forward to watching the recorded version. And sorry I can't stay, but I've got another engagement. Thanks.
Thanks, Greg, for coming. All right. So the next presenters, we're going in alphabetical order now. And this is Team Cetacean with a C, Belugas Out of Balance. So we have Cayman and Erica and Carissa. And I know I can't see if everyone's here, but if one of you all want to launch in, we'd love to hear about it. I love this picture.
I'll go ahead and get started. Cayman is not available to come tonight, so it's just going to be Erica and I. So I'm the science, well, we're actually both science teachers, but I believe Erica does some math stuff too. So this is my second year doing ORC, and I kind of stuck with this theme of working with animals that are endangered. I hadn't realized that this specific breed of belugas was endangered, while the rest of belugas that migrate are doing okay. So some of was pretty enlightening and really eye-opening for me as well, to see how this specific set of belugas stays in the Cook Inlet of Alaska, and they don't migrate. So they're not interbreeding. And so their populations are a bit endangered. And there's a variety of reasons. And we decided we were going to focus on the epigenetics portions, the data that Cayman was doing her research on. So she was doing it with the belugas as well as some dolphins. We don't quite have the dolphin data yet, but we're hoping to extend on that piece later. So I teach here at Toledo Junior Senior High, so I'm part of the Lincoln County School District. This will be my 5th year. I teach biology, chemistry, and this year I will have an entire marine science course. So that's going to be great. I can't wait to use probably all of these resources this coming year for my course. Let's see here. Like I said, it was pretty eye-opening. I hadn't realized that this was a situation for just the specific species. So we kind of wanted the students to do a bunch of background information about belugas in general. So under the engage portion, we have a short video that starts talking about a variety of reasons why these things could be happening, but we didn't want to give it all away. We really wanted the students to draw their own conclusions and then explore a bit about what's going on with belugas in general. Because not a lot of, at least when I'm teaching, not a lot of students are aware that belugas are different than other whales. And so when we start talking about them, obviously they're very cute. It engages them pretty quickly. So the first thing we did was develop this Google tour So they can see the migration of typical belugas throughout their lifetime. And there's some kind of goofy stories in there about how somebody was trying to use a beluga as a spy and they had a camera on it, and it was kind of a big hoax, but it was a funny little story. So we really wanted to get them engaged by understanding belugas in general, their migration patterns, what they eat, what their numbers are, and then eventually lead them into the Cook Inlet and have them discover what is different, what's going on, what's the problem. And then eventually, how is OSU's data being used to determine if this particular population can recover without human intervention? So that means we're looking at their teeth, methylation, we're looking at reproductive age, we're looking at how many males versus females, how long do they live, how many babies do they have, and can this particular species recover on their own without us intervening somehow. And then the very final big piece that I was kind of proud of was to, under the evaluate section, is to have them develop their own action plan, which means they have to look at all the things that are already in place and being done to recover habitats or what laws are being made, and then decide on their own which one that they think will work best, or invent their own. And then they have to meet a bunch of criteria, and it has to be feasible. It can't just be something that they make up. It has to be an action plan that's doable, where they can actually be involved and be part of the stewardship. Because I really like, in the classroom, I feel like I'm just giving out information a lot of times and they're doing the work, but I want them to get involved. So that was the main goal for that piece there. And then I'll let Erica explain all of her pieces.
Hi there. So I'm Erica Street. I teach high school, North Bend High School, biology and chemistry. And I'm pretty excited about this project because it ties together so many pieces that we talk about in biology. So the in the explore section, you know, after they do the virtual tour, one of the things that we introduce is a way that scientists can look at kind of population data and age structure and gender structure in a population, which is called a pyramid graph. And so we included a lesson from the population education nonprofit that is really great about, it used to be called Zero Population Growth a long time ago. And they really kindly made a virtual version of their graphing activity, teaching kids how to do pyramid graphs using Excel. And so that's something that I teach every year anyway. And so that is a piece that gets tied in, and then learning about how epigenetics works and doing a simulation of what actually happens to the gene as methyl groups get added, as methyl groups get taken away, what happens to the gene products, what happens to the proteins. And so kind of learning that as background in the Explore section. And then once Cayman's research comes in, where they actually use epigenetics as a clock to figure out how old the whales are, because previously the only way you could determine it was looking at dead whales and looking at their teeth. But this is a way they can take a tissue sample from living whales and figure out their age. And so once that happens, then they can actually graph the data from Cayman's lab, make a pyramid graph out of that data to figure out what's going on with these whales. Is it a healthy age structure in the population? Is it a population at risk? And then, like Cayman said, kind of put that all together into an action plan for, well, what do we do? What's the specific problem here? You know, what are some suggestions that the students have for as far as stewardship goes? So I really am excited about this because I feel like it makes a nice spiral curriculum, because it doesn't even have to all be done in sequence. It can be done, you know, kind of introduce the belugas sort of, you know, I talk about population structure and age structure in the fall, and then later bring it back when we talk about epigenetics, and then wrap it up, you know, once we've kind of put all the pieces together, but they don't really necessarily have to all be done all in one, like a consecutive period of time. So I think it's kind of cool. And I think that belugas are so charismatic and exciting that that'll give it a really nice, fun kind of context. So that's it.
That's great. Thank you so much. Do we have questions for Erica or Carissa? Awesome. All right. Well, thank you very much for, where's the love for the dugong? They're all cute in their own ways. Yeah. Yeah, I really like this lesson. And I didn't have very much experience knowing anything about what an epigenetic clock was before I read the lesson. So when it's out on the website in September, I'm excited for all of you to see it as well and try it out with your students. All right. Are there any more questions or comments? I see a couple things in the chat. I've figured out how to open it. Haha. Okay, we're going to go on to seafloor graveyards. So this would be Team Hypoxia with Jonathan Fram and Sarah Purcell and Mitch Lampson. You guys can introduce yourselves just as the others have when you jump in.
Jonathan, why don't you start us off there?
All right, sounds good. So I collect data off the coast of Oregon and Washington and provide those data to the scientific community. It's a dozen different kinds of sensors, and we're in year 7 of 25. The data that are downloaded the most and we get the most inquiries about are oxygen at the seafloor during the summer. And that's of interest to people because those are times of low oxygen, and that's the anchoring phenomena that we chose here. So in addition to the raw data, I provide kind of whatever information researchers need to use to publish. And so this was similar in that I tried to give Sarah and Mitch whatever was needed to create a lesson, which, since I don't teach high school, is something that was hard for me to figure out exactly what that would be, but they helped as help me help them, I guess, through this process. And I think I'll let Sarah and Mitch go next.
So I am Sarah Purcell, and I am a high school biology teacher in Lincoln City at TAF 712. This will be my 15th year teaching bio, and in 15 years, I have never been satisfied really with my ecology lessons and in my ecosystem stuff. I've done all kinds of cool stuff throughout the years. I just that's where there's always something missing, and so I'm always looking for more information and more real situations that I can bring into my classroom for those students. And that's kind of the take I then took with this data, was that what impact does that have on the ecosystem when the oxygen levels drop? So our anchoring phenomenon is when we've got these images from really healthy looking populations on the seafloor to a few years later when it's nothing but dead animals on the seafloor. And so that's kind of to grab the students' attention and wait, what's going on? What's causing this? Why do we see all these fish in this part of the video, but in the next part there's just all of these dead crabs? So just kind of starting off with asking all of those kinds of questions and trying to get them hooked that way. But then we do really spend time in this lesson talking about that equipment, and that RCRV project is so important, like Jonathan was saying, to be able to to continue this project, OOI project, and everything they do. So it's interesting. It was interesting to watch my students learning about the different types of equipment, in a biology class, and they're just kind of overwhelmed with, what is all this? But they got it, and they got some really great chances to have conversations around what kinds of equipment are used and why. Like, you know, I don't know if that's anything they've ever had a chance to really kind of discuss with each other. So that was really cool to watch them go through that. And then Mitch, if you want to talk about you and your part.
Yeah, hi, I'm Mitch Lamson. I teach math up at Toledo High School, Lincoln County. I don't teach science. I don't ever want to teach science. Nobody wants me teaching science. Although my dad was a biology teacher. One of my concerns when we first started this was that these are science projects with scientists, and they're science heavy, and science teachers are going to teach these in their classrooms. No math teacher is going to take a week or two to teach a science lesson that has a little bit of math in it. So what I tried to do was put something in that would be math worthy, that either the science teacher could teach, or you could grab the math teacher and say, hey, we're here. Can you do this sort of discrete lesson? And so what I came up with is I took some information, some of the data points that Jonathan had given me, and the kids are then going to enter those into Desmos and then learn how to plot a linear regression using Desmos or some other graphing calculator. And where I work, there is no some other graphing calculator. None of the kids have graphing calculators. We don't have them at the school. The kids can't afford $100 graphing calculators. And frankly, I've got a beautiful pink graphing calculator, and Desmos is 50 times more powerful and user-friendly than the handheld graphing calculators ever were. So basically that's what it does. It takes some of the data points, they plot it in, it looks sort of linear. They learn how to plot a linear regression. Desmos spits out the linear function in slope-intercept form. They can answer a bunch of questions from there. They then compare that to the real graph, look at the similarities and differences. They then compare that data, and that's inshore data, like Jonathan was talking about, with the offshore data. Again, look at the similarities and differences and why scientists would want to know that information when they're addressing the kind of questions that Jonathan's addressing.
And there were lots of opportunities in our lessons as well for extensions, like I know some other groups were talking about as well. So we did develop some extensions where Jonathan put a really great tutorial together to walk students through the Data Explorer on the OOI website, so they can go explore that data on their own if they like and kind of understand how it works. So that was an extension piece that we created, and also we put together a list of, here are all kinds of people who work on the OOI project. Here's the kinds of things that they have to do. Here's, you know, some of their educational background, what got them into this, for that career connection, so that they could really see kind of, you know, those sorts of I don't have to be a researcher if I'm interested in science. There's all of these other things that I could do as well. So I think that we had some points of, there was just so much data that we were like, I don't know what to do with this. But once we really kind of focus in on the specific dissolved oxygen data point, then stuff really kind of started to take off for us. So.
And I think that's a feeling that's pretty common when you have so much data. Like, how do you focus in to make it usable in the classroom and meaningful in the classroom? So this is a great unit you've put together so that you can actually do that and take an example and relate it to the bigger picture, and then have the opportunity, if you want, to explore and go deeper into the database on your own through the tutorial. That's great. All right. One other thing I just wanted to mention, you were talking, Mitch, about, you know, math and science in high school are often siloed. And I always feel like there are some advantages to the 5th or 6th grade teacher who just has the same students all day long and can teach all the subjects to those students, so they can do that interdisciplinary connection. And then the higher up you go, it can be difficult to make those connections. So I'm always curious to know how people within the same building, do the science and math teachers talk to each other and think about projects in this way? And are there opportunities to do that? And so hopefully these lessons can sort of help make that kind of conversation happen.
But, it's funny along those lines, as a math teacher, I'm thinking third grade teachers just teach the kids how to multiply, right? I don't need anything else. Just teach them how to multiply. Middle school teachers just teach them algebra. And then I think about a third grade teacher having not only all these math standards, but the English and I can't even imagine what a day in the life of a 6th grade, 5th grade teacher is.
Yeah, and in the chat, there's some conversation. Yi-Chung is saying we're seeing more math students becoming excellent marine scientists. Yes, understanding math and progressing in math is a real important asset to budding marine scientists. That's a good skill to have. Yeah. Great, thank you so much. And if you watch that video that Tracy showed at the beginning, I think Jonathan's in it. I don't know if we saw it. I know I watched the whole thing and I saw him loading or unloading something on the vessel. So stay tuned. And I think we're going to go on to the next group. Plastic pollution presents prodigious problems. And this team, I think, is called Plastic Fantastic, but actually their name is far longer. So if they'd like to share whatever that name was before I harshly truncated it, you're welcome to do so. This is Samreen and Jim and Eva. And thank you so much for sharing this. Yes, awesome alliteration for sure. They're all about it. I'll turn it over to you all.
Thank you. So I'm a team of one tonight. Both
Okay.
Samreen and Eva came up with conflicts last minute. They would have loved to have been here. I think they'll watch the recording. But globally, we're faced with another inconvenient truth. The convenience of plastic, especially single-use plastic, is just not sustainable in our world and in our ecosystems and for our marine organisms and for humans. And it's become pretty obvious. European Union has many plastic bans enacted or to be enacted. Senator Merkley and a partner have introduced a bill about reducing plastics and making the producers more responsible for the cleanup. And Kate and Tracy have a curriculum called Marine Debris something, and it's an excellent one, and you can look it up on the website that she may share later. But anyway, this is happening, and our coastal students can just go out on the beach and the phenomenon is there. Plastic is there. It's not a mystery. It's there. So just briefly touring the poster, Samreen, I'll talk more about her later, but she's a research scientist at OSU. I'm a semi-retired teacher, still active in outreach and things like that. And then Eva is at Lincoln City Middle School, where several people are from. She is a tech Einstein. She's just a genius. She's the one who, she and Kate put it together. We had ideas, but they made them real. And Eva actually implemented it in the last week of school and found it successful, that it was compelling because it's so relevant to our lives. The poster pictures, can you make this bigger, particularly the graph element, Kate? And put you to work.
I don't think I can because it's
Okay,
just a
then I'll just
share.
talk about it as best I can. So Samreen's research is little bitty shrimp and fish. I mean, they're practically microscopic. And she and her colleagues submit them to or expose them to plastics and to pesticides and such, but of course plastics was our area of interest. And then she gets all this data about how their behavior changes, which it does, from ingesting plastics. And then it's graphed. And you were talking about data literacy. Man, we were on it and didn't even know it. Because what they need to do is they take these graphs and through Eva's math interpretation of how to do it, they make sense out of the data. They do all kinds of connections and reach conclusions. So it's pretty cool. So as you know, plastics are everywhere in our daily lives, especially single-use plastics. We see them as marine debris. We have to understand their pathways to our beaches and coastal waters in order to minimize the volume of these harmful pollutants in our marine and terrestrial ecosystems. And the terrestrial piece, it wasn't a focus for us, but it's real. We're breathing nanoplastics. Nanoplastics are in the food chain, not only the ocean, but our agriculture. When you throw your acrylic shirt or t-shirt or sweater in the dryer, it shoots out little nanoplastics all over the place. So, I mean, it's huge. Thankfully, we're starting to realize that. So it matters. And so we have a lesson. We actually have 4 lessons and an introduction. And so I'll talk about the introduction later, which makes it a conclusion, I guess. But anyway, so we do the history of plastics, and we have a TED Talk that's really good, a video. We actually started off with a quiz with all kinds of facts that I think are stunning to the students who aren't aware. The amount of tons and tons going in annually into the ocean, how many companies produce 55% of all the plastic pollution, just 20. And more facts like that. The idea that it's either buried, burned, or 9% is recycled only. So again, waking them up without, scaring them too much, because we'll unscare them later, I hope. And then lesson number 2 is focused on the research initially with the little guys. There was a picture of them, but I guess not. Anyway, so that's really gets them involved in seeing how the adult researchers are doing their work and figuring out the experiments and making sense out of what they've done. And then, of course, we talk about entanglement. We talk about the turtles eating plastic and the birds eating plastic and dying. They think they're full and they're not. It's plastic, no nutrition there. The coral reefs are dying because of plastic. The ocean bottoms getting covered with plastic, the big garbage patches that you read about. So anyway, that's all in lesson 2. Lesson 3, the effects on humans, which I just mentioned when I was talking about the inconvenient truth of plastics being so convenient, but also so deadly. And then lesson 4 is the search for solutions, community solutions. We have at least 2 exciting videos here. One is some kids in Hawaii working on some projects to be role models, and then our students look for solutions and actions. And then we finish with a video from Australia, actually hosted by Jacques Cousteau's son, Michael. And you have all these Australians are concerned about it. So I think that really helps make it global and not just a thing that the teachers are talking about. We have extensions, particularly the beach cleanup, and then there's a game where they feed like the marine organisms do, but they pick up all kinds of plastics amongst the food they think they're getting. And this is done with beans and things like that. it's a lot of fun, a lot of interaction. We hope to get letters written, and parents talk to, of course, and relatives. And then the introduction is pretty good. What we do is we start off with a film called 3 Seconds. It's an award-winning film. Hopefully you've seen it. A gentleman dressed in a derby and a 3-piece suit and an umbrella sitting in a beach chair on the ocean. But it's an overview of how humans have affected the Earth environment, you know, and in a negative way, obviously. And our time here is only 3 seconds in the whole picture. But he ends with hope. He ends with hope and a challenge that we do something to make a difference. So that's cool. And then we bring it down in the introduction with a Kahoot quiz that's on ocean plastics, and then another video on what marine debris is. And so, yeah, I mean, there is now a vast array of stuff out there. I mean, basically, when I was doing the research, because I've been interested in this before, the ORCE thing, and I had a year's worth of stuff easy, but saner minds kept me to 4 lessons. We figure this is 5 to 6 days, depending on how you do it and whether you can get outside.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, and I wanted to read, Sam Reen sent me something. She said, "It was my pleasure to work with Jim and Eva on this project. No doubt I learned much about K-12 students through the process and ways to teach them higher level lab processes in a more simple graphical form. The activity provided me insight into what we need to target in the next research to make it applicable for students and conserve our ocean at the same time. Teaching kids about pollutants is not fun, but this is required for them and future health of our ecosystem. I would like to extend my thanks to Kate and Tracy, who transformed our thoughts into a beautiful poster that you see there." And then quickly, I said, I wrote down because, anyway, we enjoyed this opportunity to collaborate and produce what we believe is a teachable set of science and math lessons on the crucial topic of plastic pollution. I really, having taught 33 years and before tech, I really believe this stuff's ready to go.
Thank you, Jim. That's great. As you know, marine debris is a favorite topic of mine, and I love how you ended on a note of action and stewardship and hope. I think it's always, there's a lot to learn about plastic pollution, as you said. And so the story that you've created here is, you know, leads everybody through the whole process to the ending where students can make a difference, and not just in their personal lives, but also in the community level. I think that's really important. So thank you so much. And I also wanted to point out that you were reminding me about the Kahoot, and I know Eva put together Nearpod presentations. I would say in general, the ORCE lessons this year compared to the previous year have so many more of these tools that teachers are so good at using now. You know, in addition to videos, there's Edpuzzles and quizzes and all kinds of opportunities that and tools that help teach online or in hybrid lessons, and then can be translated into the in-person classroom as well. But it's been fun I didn't know about Nearpod until this lesson, so I got to go explore it.
That's pretty amazing.
Does anyone else have any questions before we head on to the next? Thanks again, Jim.
Oh, you're welcome, Kate.
Sea Lion Feeding Frenzy. This group is called Team Sea Lion. And we have Samantha and Nicole and Jason/William. And I think Nicole and Samantha are here. Are you guys ready to take it away?
Yep, I think we're ready. So, hi, everyone. My name is Samantha Ray, and I am a master's student at Oregon State University. My research focuses on sea lion health and immune function and how coastal contaminants influence sea lion health. I had the pleasure of working with Nicole and William to develop our lesson plan, the Sea Lion Feeding Frenzy. Since both Nicole and William teach science, but at different levels, we developed a lesson plan that's suited for both middle school and high school students. Briefly, I just wanted to say that ORSI gave us a unique opportunity and a very exciting chance to collaborate on a team and develop this lesson plan based on research that's occurring right here in Oregon. It gave me valuable insight into the hard work and the requirements that go into developing lessons and teaching students. As a scientist, I think it's important to be able to communicate with the public and share research in a relatable fashion. And so personally, this was a very valuable experience. So our Sea Lion Feeding Frenzy lesson focuses on sea lions and what they can help tell us about human health. Some sea lions have developed a behavioral pattern of traveling miles upriver to feed on migrating salmon in the Columbia River. Our anchoring phenomenon is that sea lions are eating salmon at the dams, with our driving question being, what does sea lion feeding have to do with human health? As you can see from the photos, large numbers of sea lions prey heavily on the fish populations that are waiting to cross over the dams along the Columbia River Basin. While unfortunate for the fish populations, this gives us a unique opportunity to learn about sea lions and ask questions that relate to human health. Sea lions are considered sentinel species because they have long lifespans, are long-term coastal residents, feed at high trophic levels, and have unique fat reserves that can store contaminants. When we are able to study them, they can provide information about environmental and public health dangers. And this research is important because coastal and tribal communities rely heavily on fish runs for subsistence, economic, and cultural purposes. These communities have higher than normal fish consumption and are susceptible to marine contaminants. Us scientists use the One Health paradigm to analyze the connection between contaminants, fish, sea lions, and people to make informed decisions regarding public health, environmental protection, and wildlife conservation.
All right, and I'm going to talk about our lesson activities. So I'm Nicole Kranick, and I teach science at Bandon, at Harbor Lights Middle School in Bandon, down on the South Coast. And we also worked with Jason or William, who is a science. I think he's taught some math as well up in Florence. And so we were taking the research that Samantha's been doing with sea lions and tying it to kind of an ecology to kind of based off our food webs and food chains and how contaminants can bioaccumulate and biomagnify through ecosystems and what effects that might have on them and as well as on humans. So we are starting with that anchoring phenomenon. We show them some images of sea lions feeding at those dams and kind of congregating there. And then our driving question, again, is what does the sea lions feeding there have to do with human health? We'd like to start with something really active to get them kind of engaged in it. And so we found a couple bioaccumulation activities that really are modeling this process of bioaccumulation and biomagnification. I unfortunately had really hoped to try out this lesson with my students, and we are on hybrid schedule, and I only saw my students one day a week, and so it was not in the cards, unfortunately, by the end of the year when I was teaching that unit. So hoping to get it done next year. I think it'll be a good time for us. So we're following that then down to the explain section, and we have a presentation with some key vocabulary. There's a video about the difference, or kind of explaining bioaccumulation and biomagnification, some factors that can affect it, and then some case studies with things like DDT and mercury, and things like that, PCBs. And then there are some extension activities that we also included. Just, people can kind of piece them together as they have time for, as there's interest. I think there was looking into fish kind of warnings, if there's any contaminants in your local ecosystem and that aren't allowing those fisheries to go on currently, and different things like that. And then the evaluate for that portion is to actually have students develop a model of a food chain, of a marine food chain, and then to also model how a contaminant would biomagnify up that food chain. And so I developed a kind of a worksheet that they could do, but it involves some research and there's some different flexibility with that and how students model it. But they're explaining their thinking, which definitely goes into those next generation science standards of developing and using models. And then we kind of loop back into the Explore and we'll do a data analysis activity. And so Samantha had some data that she was able to use with sea lion diet. And so it actually looked at some of the different fish species that were in the sea lions when they died. And I think the data was mainly from euthanized sea lions at the dam. Correct me if I'm wrong there, Sam. And unfortunately, with sea lions, it's hard because they're protected marine species. And so we aren't able to get a lot of information. And so when they are euthanized at the dams there, that does provide an opportunity, like Sam said earlier, to collect that information that we can then use for projects like this. And so it has them looking at sea lion diet data as well as mercury concentration, blood mercury. And they do some graphing, some bar graphing mainly. We did provide instructions to do that digitally through like Google Sheets or Excel. And it has a data set, and Sam did a fantastic job making that really accessible to students and teachers, especially not having ever developed lessons for middle schoolers before. So great job. And then we then wanted to talk about sentinel species and introduce students to what it means to be a sentinel species. We introduced some key vocabulary like indicator species and keystone species, which are kind of steps in that, I guess, kind of getting more specific to a sentinel species. We provided some examples and had kind of an interactive presentation where had opportunities for teachers to pause and ask questions and have students come up with their own thoughts before moving on, and had some teacher notes and things in there too. And then so that's through that presentation there. And then there's a reading. I put it kind of under the elaborate, or we decided to put it in the elaborate. It's getting into the One Health paradigm and looking at how sentinel species, which are these, doesn't just have to be animals, but species that can tell us a lot about human health, maybe dangers in the ecosystem, or exactly canary in a coal mine, exactly that was kind of the quintessential sentinel species. So we tie that into what Sam's really been working with, the One Health paradigm, and how these living species other than humans are in the same environments as us, and sometimes the same diet, in the case of sea lions, and things like that, and how that ties in to their health, and our health is all tied into one health. So there is a reading there. You know, maybe in upper grades, it could be done as an independent reading comprehension activity, or it would be a really great whole class discussion as well. There's some discussion questions in there, or they could just be students answering them independently. We also included some career connections activity, just as another little elaborate connection there. STEM career explorations, that also has a little bit about Samantha's research. And then the final evaluate is a research project. So we've gone over, you know, why sea lions are good sentinel species and important. And so what other sentinel species are out there, and what can they tell us about human health or about the conditions, the environment that we're living in. That the final piece of that. And I really gained a lot from this. I loved working with these two, and I look for ways to bring real data, real things that are really happening, you know, in students, like, why are we learning this? Well, this is actually happening. This can affect you and the people you love. And anytime we can get them more literate in reading and using data, I think the better equipped they'll be for our world. So it was very valuable. And that's all I have.
Thank you, Nicole. I think Mitch had a question. He was raising his hand.
Yes, Mitch, thank you.
Well, I was just wondering what we look at the sea lions and we're like, oh, their fatty tissue is absorbing these chemicals. That's bad because it's bad for humans. What do we call the animals that, like tuna, that have mercury and we can't eat it? Like, what are those animals called? Is there a phrase for that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if they're completely considered keys, but I know, like, when we're pregnant, you know, we're not allowed to eat, you know, up these food chain because they're high enough up the food chain that they've accumulated, you know, they can accumulate those heavy metals and contaminants. I don't know if they would fit under, you know, sentinel or keystone species, possibly.
I have a question. Did you ever discuss a need to maybe make sea lions lovable? Because there are a lot of negative attitudes towards them. And I'm just wondering if you feel like you have to make a case for them and overcome that.
Yeah, well, you know, and we originally kind of wanted to go the you know, dam the dams route, and Kate kind of gently steered us, like, maybe you don't want to do like the most controversial subject in science or
when I tell people
policy right away.
When I tell people that my research focuses on sea lions, they either have one of two reactions. They are either, oh, sea lions are so cute, I love them, or they completely love fish and absolutely hate sea lions. I have not found someone in between. So it's funny that you mentioned that.
It's a polarizing animal.
Yeah, I was impressed with the way you kind of avoided that whole topic. I think that was great because you're really focusing on bioaccumulation and sentinel species. And this is a story that goes along with that has a lot of other aspects that you didn't necessarily touch on, but that students might have some experience they could bring to the table when discussing these animals.
Yeah, they're definitely, you know, talk about extension, and we really like the whole town hall idea, like we really wanted to do that and all that. And so you could definitely, if you wanted to go there, you could totally go there.
Great. Well, thank you so much. And I want to say, when I was looking at your lesson, that there's some great websites, the EPA lesson you found and an Oregon State University lesson, all on bioaccumulation. I thought those were great resources to tie in. I was unfamiliar with, that fit really well with the unit that you put together here. And then also this 5E lesson that we guided everyone to use. I think there's the main engage, explore, explain, elaborate, evaluate. But I think all the teams in some way sort of like had like mini 5Es within each of these sessions too, because the beginning of the class period, you want to do something to engage your students and then explore and explain. So there's a lot of levels to this 5E. And so you can really see that in yours, where you have a bioaccumulation activity that kind of goes through, and then also the data analysis that goes through the levels as well. I thought you put it together really nicely.
Thank you.
Okay. I don't know how we're doing on time, but there's a couple left. Let's see who we got next. I don't know my alphabet. Swimming on an empty shark tank. All right. So this group is Team Sharkbait, which I think also has a longer name, which they might share with you. Taylor Chappell, Jasmine Garcia, and Kelsey Hart. Are you, I think we at least have 2 of the 3 here today.
Hey, Kate, can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Great, wonderful. Well, thanks for the intro. So Kelsey and I are here. I'm not sure if Jasmine has gotten on yet, but I'm Taylor Chappell. I'm a assistant professor at OSU, and I study the movements and behaviors of big animals. And so for this project, we were looking at some white shark data, and I think the sort of before even getting to sort of our anchoring phenomena, the big sort of message is to understand our ecosystems is more than sort of what's been presented on television or what's been presented in popular media. And so we were looking at white sharks and trying to understand a little bit more about their role in ecosystems. And so some of the work that I do is to put biologgers on these animals, which is a sensor tag that can look at a lot of the really fine scale movements that these animals are making. So things like how they're using a water column, or what type of temperature that they're enjoying. So if you look at the data that John had earlier, that how the animals are utilizing the different water temperatures or parameters of the water column. And so the tags that we're looking at specifically, or the data, I guess, that we were looking at specifically, were the tailbeat frequencies. And the idea is, from tailbeat frequency, you can understand the energetics that an animal is using in its day-to-day life. And so each of us, whether we're going to the store, or we're going to the gym, or we're sitting in front of our computer, use different amounts of energy. And so the role that a predator plays in the ecosystem is really is described by the energy that they need. So we were looking at tailbeat frequency between individuals of different locations, whether these sharks were in South Africa or in California, and then across different ages and sexes, to see if different individuals or different groups had different energetic requirements, because that helps us understand what these animals are doing in an environment. And so we did a number of different activities, which I think I'll let Kelsey describe a little bit more. But really the goal was to understand what predators do and why they do it. So not that predators are out there and they're separate from us or separate from these ecosystems, but that they really are a part, and their role is defined by their physiology and their biology and the ecology around. So with that, I'll let Kelsey take that away.
Right, and our full team name was Sharkbait Ooh-Ha-Ha, like from Finding Nemo. Yeah. We kind of got fun little movie and TV references. Our Shark Tank thing is in reference to sharks needing to eat and them being on an empty tank and needing energy requirements. But also later in the project, they have to do a restaurant project, and they have to like pitch a restaurant, kind of like they pitch something on Shark Tank. So it's like a twofold thing there. So we started off our unit with kind of engaging them by just getting to watch some videos of different shark movements. And then they had to pair that or match it to a tailbeat frequency, so they could see how different types of swimming and different activities that sharks are doing are reflected by different tailbeats. And then we also did like an intro to the project where we really had them learn some really important vocab words that they needed to know, and just kind of get an idea of what they would be doing, why sharks are important, and why it's not all just, oh my God, shark attack, Shark Week. So for lesson 2, we really started to kind of dive into the information, and we had them doing a web quest where they had different resources that they would go and explore and try to figure out information about energy and calories and sharks in general, like their the actual animal itself, not just what they need. There was also like converting energy or fuel to energy and how that kind of equated with each other. And then just things like shark diet and stuff like that, so they could really get a good background on a lot of the activities we would be doing later in the unit. And then for our third lesson, we were having the kids break out into groups and really do a jigsaw where each group was handling a subgroup of sharks from one location, whether that be like adult females in California or juvenile males in South Africa. We had several different subgroups within our 2 locations, and they had to actually come up with the data for their 4 sharks from their subgroup and their location, and then they were combining it as a class. And so we had a Excel spreadsheet where they could, once they figured out everything in their worksheet, they would then put it into the Excel spreadsheet, and it would give them their energy requirement that their shark subgroup would have, which they then had to go and work with in lesson 4. They worked with it in an energy cost worksheet where they had to do things like look at, they would graph the average for each subgroup within their location. So they would have to get that information from other groups. They had to graph it on a coordinate plane for each location. And then there were several questions that they had to really analyze those graphs and see if they saw patterns, see if they saw differences, and kind of compare and contrast. So then that led us to, once they've done all the information and research and calculations for what energy requirements do sharks have, they then had to pick a subgroup and get the average amount of calories that they require. And they actually had to design a shark restaurant. The example that we used when we were planning this is Sharkdonald's instead of McDonald's. So they would come up with, and part of the restaurant was that they had to come up with a punny name. So we did spend a good chunk of a meeting coming up with punny names like Taco Shell and or some of the other one, Carpies, like just different sea-themed restaurants because it was punny and fun. So they would have a parent restaurant. So if they picked McDonald's, part of their project would be creating a human meal from McDonald's and then creating a shark meal that was comprised of things that a shark would eat. And then they would have to use proportions and like human energy requirements. And I think we chose to use just like the energy requirements of like a marathon runner. And they would have to create a human-sized portion of the shark's meal and then a shark-sized portion of the human meal. And so we were really working with proportions. So we got in a lot of things for math. We got unit rates, we got proportions, we got graphing, we got statistics. So we're really trying to hit a lot of those different skills in kind of a fun way. And also give them time to kind of create maybe some artistic things because they also had to create their menu for both the parent restaurant and the shark restaurant. So, yeah. Oh, and then the final lesson would be them presenting their restaurant and their information about their shark subgroup, and then just kind of doing a gallery walk where they got to kind of explore other groups' restaurants.
I think Mitch might have had his hand up at one point. Do you still have a question, Mitch?
I always have questions. What I never thought of it. It makes perfect sense. The more they work, the more they have to eat. But I guess I would just always assume that it's all the same, right? So what's the answer? What's that? Like the bigger ones work more, the younger ones, the females, the males.
You gotta do the lesson. There's no free lunch here, buddy. No free lunch.
No free lunch.
So,
no free Shark Donald's for you. Do the work. Come on.
And it's
so
fun
that's
because
one of the. Go ahead. Sorry, Kate.
No, I was going to say it is fun because I didn't actually see the key to the questions, and I was trying to match things together and get my whole family involved actually. And it was, it's a fun. This was a really fun lesson to work through, and I laughed out loud, especially when I got to the end when I realized, oh, Shark Tank, I get it. Like all the silliness.
It's a slow burn. It's a slow burn. But yeah, so Mitch, to get to your question, is that that's the cool thing about it is it depends because there's two different measurements that you have about basically metabolism, and there's a per pound metabolism and then a metabolism of your whole size, right? So like a mouse or a rat is going to have a really high metabolic rate, but when you take into account how big we are for the metabolic rate, it all changes. So that's part of the things that the students will explore in this activity is just trying to understand a little bit about how it varies between these different groups and what's the difference between an adult and a subadult. Is it just size, or is there something else that sort of plays into it? So there's some. I think there's a couple different layers or levels of questions you could ask or answer with it. So, and then I'm still not giving you the answer. So you'll have to do the exercises.
There you go. Thank you so much.
In the chat, the food eating very relatable to students. It's actually part of the restaurant project where before they even do the marathon runner, they have to say like, hey, if you go to McDonald's, what do you typically order? And then figure out how many calories that is. And so they can kind of see that bit too. So there's a little bit of them in the restaurant project also.
Makes it very relevant. This is great.
Oh, my Elise, I love that. That'd be so fun. That would be really fun to have them.
So in the chat, my Elise Tolan wrote, could Taft Culinary also get involved?
Yeah, that'd be fun. That'd be super fun.
Kelsey will have to share all the names of different seafood items that we came up with, like the chicken of the sea nuggets, and we have them. We have them.
We had a ton.
Popsicles and those types of things.
Shark Donald's. There was instead of Arby's, I think it was Carpies. Skip Jack in the Box. I love that, Mitch. That's awesome. Yeah, I can't remember the rest of them. I had a whole list. I had like 10 or 12 different restaurants that we had come up with punny names for. During one of our meetings, I was literally like yelling across the hallway to my husband's office. And I was like, hey, you're king of puns. Like, come up with some punny names for restaurants. He's like, for what? And I was like, shark restaurants. Like, he didn't get it. And then.
That's great.
So
Thank you
I just
so
wanted
much.
to throw something out there.
One last thing. Go ahead, Jim.
Yeah. So Noah Fisheries' most popular video is a Mako shark's last meal, and I really think you could work this in because what they do is some fishermen donate a gigantic great white, to a science outfit. They bring it into the lab, they dissect it, and they pull an entire intact almost sea lion out of the shark, and it's really a well done video, and it may be appropriate either as a celebration but don't necessarily watch it right after lunch
or right before.
So should we? Yeah. It'll be a good segue between the sea lion
right
yes
unit and our unit.
Yeah, I thought the same thing. To the detriment of the sea lions, but
yes, all connected. All right. Well, thank you so much, Taylor and Kelsey. That was great. We have another team to share, and this is Team Wetlands. Marsh Magic.
Hey, Kate, can we
Yes.
share our screen? For this?
Yes, I was wondering if you're going to want to do that. Yes, go ahead.
All right. Does that look good?
Great.
Okay. So I'm Jenny Schmidt. I'm with the South Slough National Estuarine Research Reserve. And I worked with Christina and Andy, and they're going to introduce themselves in a minute. So I'm the watershed coordinator here, and I do a lot of monitoring related to wetlands and the importance of wetlands and looking at wetlands in response to climate change. So this lesson was kind of all about wetlands, but I'm going to let Christina introduce herself next.
Hi, I'm Christina Webster, and I teach at Toledo Junior Senior High School. I teach math, science, and computer science. And this is going to be my 4th year as a teacher, only my 2nd year at Toledo.
Andy, you're up next.
You're muted, Andy.
Hey guys. Yeah, Andy here, Bedingfield. I am a teacher at TAF 712, mainly chemistry, but also marine science and some computer science as well. And just give you an overview here of the poster, and then we're going to leave the poster and show you the stuff. So I'm going to go much quicker through the poster than a lot of other people. But really, we're looking at Ginny's research, which she'll explain more in a second, but at this anchoring phenomenon of these 3 sites. One site was used, a wetland site, by the way, a marsh, used for agriculture and then restored. One site used for agriculture and no longer used for agriculture, but not restored. And one site more or less untouched as much as possible in an area so close to other agriculture. Ton of data with those phenomena. And we've got a couple of things. We've got videos to engage, but the big centerpiece is really under the Explore tab, this Prezi that you see. She's going to show you that in a second. And it's amazing. You'll see it here in a second, but kids get to explore it by clicking around on it. A Prezi is really designed to present to people, but we're using it here more like a website where kids are going to be able to click around and explore data. You'll see how that works. And then we also want to show you a notebook. So as kids are sort of exploring around, Christina's going to show you a notebook that they answer questions in. And finally, we're going to show you a summative formative assessment tool that we built at the end. So I think Jenny's going to take over now, talk about her research and show us some stuff.
Yeah, so we basically came up with some products to get the students engaged in wetlands in general. And so my intern this summer, she was a college student, and she did a great presentation on wetlands and what they are. She did it, it's kind of a nice overview. It's pretty short, it's only 8 minutes. And then she also did it in Spanish. She was a Spanish speaking second language student. So she has a version of it in Spanish, which is great for students where that's an easier language for them to understand things, especially science. So kind of a general overview of what wetlands are and why they're important, and the fact that in Oregon, at least, a lot of our wetlands have been converted to either urban areas or primarily agricultural lands back in the early 1900s, late 1800s. A lot of the wetlands were filled and disconnected from regular flooding regimes. And so that really converted a lot of them into these different habitats that are still sort of wetlands, but not as healthy. So this presentation really goes over why healthy wetlands matter, and the fact that a lot of organizations in Oregon are now trying to restore wetlands back to a more natural state. And so we use 3 different wetlands that South Slough has, and we give them these little really quick videos. I think they're each less than a minute, about the 3 different wetland types. And so this is like an example of the wetland that was impacted and then restored. Sorry, it's annoying because hang on, I'm just gonna get rid of the Zoom bar is in my way up top. This is just an example of the wetland that was converted to agricultural land, but not restored. so students can kind of see the differences with vegetation and habitat. Their teachers can ask them to what they're observing. And finally, a video that wasn't impacted as much. So it was never converted to agricultural land. It was never filled or diked or any of those things. And so this gives the students a chance to kind of think about what wetlands are, why they're interesting to study and important for us to study. And then the next thing, as Andy mentioned, that we created was this Prezi. So it's basically a way for students or a teacher leading students, if that's more appropriate, to be able to explore some of the data related to this. So they can start in on these 3 sites. These are all sites within the South Slough. They can look into some more detail on the sites, kind of get the history of each site. There's the link to the videos that I just showed you guys. So they can do that. And then they can get into how these sites are different. So there's always the cool, engaging animals like lamprey that kids like. So we can look at lamprey distribution. We can look at scientific techniques used to get at some of this data, like electrosampling, and how that's done and why we use that, or things like environmental DNA and what that is, with some videos on how it's used. So it's kind of a way to show data, let the students kind of free-form explore a little bit, give them information on different scientific techniques, and then they can go back out and do that with, you know, a different section. So we have sections on beavers, lamprey, wetland plants, birds, habitat mapping, stream temperature, hydrology, and stream habitat. And so each of these has different ways to represent the data so that math teachers can talk about different graphing techniques. I try to create like a variety of ways to visualize data for each of these segments. And so then I think, Christina, did you want to start talking
Dovetails
about
right into Christina's notebook.
Yeah, so we created this wetlands field notebook to kind of go along with all the data that's throughout this Prezi. And it's broken down by tabs that are linked to each individual section of the Prezi. So when we kind of first started thinking about what we wanted to do for a lesson, you know, we're coming off of this year in COVID where we're teaching online for the most part and kind of just trying to be flexible with what is something we could do if we were in person, but also something that we could use virtually. And so we kind of made this like virtual field trip essentially with this field notebook with some tips for how to use the notebook and then also where to access information on the Prezi. We tried to come up with questions that would help students direct them to the information that they needed, but still require them to kind of pull the information out for themselves. And we really broke it down into, you know, some of it's really basic information that they just need to be able to kind of understand what they're looking at, whereas some of it is making them critically think about the data that they're seeing, which I think is really important. A lot of the time you give a student a graph and they kind of look at you like, I have no idea what you're talking about. What does this even mean? And so we wanted to guide them through it without giving them the answers. And like I said, it's broken down into each section with kind of the most important pieces that we thought they would want to pull out. We broke it down into areas where they could stop and have discussion. What I really like about the way we set this up is, you know, if you're on a time crunch and you can't cover the whole thing, you can pick a few sections and only cover those parts of the notebook. You can do this individually if you have students that are really, you know, work really hard on their own. You can do it in pairs. It's kind of, we set it up more to do it in pairs, but it's not necessary. You could even do it in small groups. And so we just tried to make it really flexible, given that we didn't know what we would be looking at with the coming years as far as COVID. So it's just a Google Slides presentation. All of the slides are created as master slides, so the students can't erase the questions. They just add a text box under each question to answer it. And then you don't have to waste a bunch of paper to print out worksheets but you can delete, like make a copy of it and delete the slides that you don't want the students to do, if that is something, if you're crunched for time. So. And I think Andy's going to talk about kind of the summative assessment we came up with for the
Yeah.
end.
Totally. I think I'll briefly talk about the, before I jump into the summative, we also have traditional multiple choice tests that go with this, and quizzes with a Z, the online version of practice multiple choice tests that go with this. And then the multiple choice test, you're really just getting base knowledge and vocabulary. Yeah, there you go. Yeah, there's a quizzes, Q-U-I-Z-I-Z-Z, love it. Kahoot's great too. Quizzes, those kids work at their own pace, which they love. They're still competing against each other, but they work at their own pace. And then you can also use them as full-on assessments. You just click a button and you can make it more like a test. You can take away some of the gaming aspects and use exactly the same platform for an actual test too. So anyway, we have that piece. And then what we're going to go to then is our summative performance assessment, which I use best practices mainly from a thing called SNAP, the Stanford NGSS Assessment Project. They got a great website. Just Google it, you'll find it, about how to build these. And so if you'll go to the next slide, just some instructions. I'm going to go through those. More instructions, and then you're going to have the standard next. And I'll pause here for a second and read what our standard is. Evaluate the claims, evidence, and reasoning that the complex interactions in ecosystems maintain relatively consistent numbers and the types of organisms in stable conditions, but changing conditions may result in a new system. And then over on the right, not going to read through all that, but if you want to get in the detail of what we expect the students to be able to do, what we should see them doing, and what they should know, that's all there, line by line. And so what we're going to do next is have a set of central questions that's going to really seed them to think about species richness. And go to the next one. And considering, is it good or bad? And then what generally happens to it with humans, and then invasive species. Seeding them for the next section where they're going to look at a phenomenon. So here comes a phenomenon that is in the Prezi, but I'm going to hit it with them again and show the species richness data and have them comparing Wasson and Tom's, I believe, on the next few slides. More instructions, and then here you go. Here's the actual data. Now you've got to make a claim about Wasson and Anderson's, your old CER. Make a claim about Wasson and Anderson's ecosystems, how they're being affected by human interactions, and then back that up with some evidence. Hopefully they're going to see the species richness data, which is a huge signal in the data. That's where we're trying to get them to. And so you do that, but the standard doesn't say doesn't really even say to make a claim. You're supposed to evaluate claims. We kind of added that on. So we're going to have students evaluating other students' claims. In the final section, they're going to finally achieve the standard there on slide 15, where they're going to evaluate a partner's claim and then and do that. So the way I grade these is with a private in-person presentation. You could present these to the whole class if you wanted to, or have everybody do that, done that in the past, or you can read these slides. You could grade these slides by reading these slides if you wanted to. I personally don't do it that way. It takes more time with the personal interaction with the students. But when you have a face-to-face conversation with somebody about all this stuff, you can fill in gaps that they have as you go, if that's your style, and that is my style. I want them to learn it no matter how, and this assessment is for learning as much as anything. Or if they may need to get some feedback and go back and work on it and come back to you. They're either already over the line, they've killed this thing, or they're somewhere in the middle, and there's so much you can do when you have them face-to-face rather than giving written feedback, and it's a one and done thing, or maybe it's even a multiple thing, but multiple rounds of written feedback. I'm sure you've been through that process in editing or whatever. A face-to-face conversation can move so much more information just in a few minutes. You can get so much more done face-to-face than writing back and forth if that's the way you do it. Anyway, that's the deal. Summative performance assessment.
Then we also made a few other resources that we don't have pulled up, but we've created like a glossary of different terms that students might need for quick access, a teacher guide that has some background information about some of the phenomenon, just in case the teachers aren't familiar, that came from Jenny and her research, and then also some additional questions that would be good for in-class discussion that might be a little high end for students to kind of get to on their own, but would be great for additional discussion at the end or as you work through specific sections of the lesson.
This is terrific, you guys. I'm just so impressed with all that you put into this. And that's why I was wondering if you're going to take control so you could like lead us through it. It's a lot more interactive than looking at a slide. Oh, Mitch.
There's something magic about that Prezi. You know, I've seen people present with Prezi and I'm like, ho hum, whatever, you got fancy transitions. I'm still using Google Slides or PowerPoint. But when you actually play with it yourself, you guys have done it too, Kate. There's something with your brain where you feel like you're exploring an environment. That's
right.
Cool.
Well, I know something else too that got brought up earlier about tribal land. So we did include also some links to lessons that have been developed through like the tribal curriculum about lamprey and their importance. And so I think it's really awesome because you can still tie it into all these other additional topics that we don't necessarily really get to in the lesson, but there's so many supplemental things that can go with this, including field trips. I mean, to your own wetlands that are nearby if you're not near the South Slough. So.
Absolutely. Everyone's always welcome.
Excellent. Thank you so much. All right. We only have a few minutes left, so I'm going to quickly share my screen this way, she said. Ta-da! Okay. Well, thank you all for sharing your projects. I hope you enjoyed as much as I did checking out everybody else's angles, and all the connections actually between the lessons was fun to see too. What I've been trying to do is take your excellent work and put them into a standard so that the units look the same and recognizable as ORCE units. And so probably everybody here has gotten an email from me at some point, probably pretty recently, with the first draft of what the lesson could look like and little questions that I have along the way. And they should be ready for putting on the website in September. One thing that we've been doing in the past is taking all of these student handouts and rubrics and extra pieces that are hyperlinked on the right side of these lessons, and making them so that they are hosted on the ORCE website. So they're a PDF that's on the website, and so that when you're uploading them, you're not going to Google Drive. So this year, something I wanted to do is make sure that it's not just a PDF, but a doc or a slide presentation or something that teachers could download and then mess around with it and add their own and pick out questions. And so just modify it as needed, which would probably be more useful. The PDF is nice because it can be all accessible for audiences, ADA accessible, and also preserves the formatting, but having also the other option for customizing and uploading it into your Google files so your students can enter in right on the form, hopefully will be useful. But I look to you teachers for your suggestions. I've talked to a couple of you already to see what you think about it all. Some things like, Nearpod and Kahoot, they're external anyway, so it's really only linking to those things. And the Wetlands Notebook, I'll have to talk to you guys about how to make that work. And maybe some things will end up on the Google Drive, I'm not sure. So anyway, it's a process, and I appreciate all the hard work you've all put into this. Right now, the website for ORCE has 8 lessons from the previous year, and we're going to be adding those 7 other units in. So there'll be 15, do the math, 15 lessons. And just as a recap, we've had 25 teachers involved in this project and 14 researchers. And we're excited to continue with this project into future years. And that leads me to the upcoming opportunity. We're now recruiting for teachers and scientists who want to participate in ORCE for this coming school year. And teachers are middle or high school teachers from Oregon. Scientists are Oregon based from whatever organization you're from, if you're a marine scientist, ideally with some kind of data to be able to share in a lesson. And the application process, it's an online application you can find on the ORCE website. There's also flyers that tell more about it, and you can share with your peers and encourage people who you think might be interested to participate. Those applications are live and the flyers are live on the website now. I'll make them a little bit more prominent tomorrow, now that this activity is done. But please apply by October 15th, and then selections will be made within that following week so that we can have a kickoff probably in November, December, and get started in earnest in the new year with lesson development and implementation and piloting. Oh, so that is the end of the things that we wanted to share. And I really appreciate all of you coming tonight and sharing your work. And I'm excited to see it out in the world and being used by teachers in Oregon and beyond. And if you want to stick around for a minute or two, we can answer any final questions or thoughts.
Hi, Kate and Tracy, thank you so much for this. I was wondering if I can stay back and ask you a question.
Sure. And actually, I think Tracy's going to put a post survey in the link, because before you leave, we want to make sure you just fill out the quick survey about this event. I can see she's madly putting it there. And if you don't, then I'm going to end up emailing it to you. Oh, I can see she's madly doing it. Yes. Oh, there it is. So they're in the chat there. If you scroll up past folks' comments, there's a Google form that you can fill out. We really appreciate it, because everything we get feedback from all of you will help us make our next iteration even better. But I really enjoyed hearing from all of you today, and the time just flew by for me.
Yes, thank you all so much for all of your hard work and for taking the time, the extra time to be with us this evening. We really appreciate it.